In the autumn of 1936, on a wind-bitten stretch of range outside Miles City, Montana, a cattleman named Wyatt Holloway rode home from the railhead with $42.60 folded into the sweatband of his hat. He did not stop at the bank in town. That night, by lantern light, he pried up a plank under the bunkhouse floor and slipped most of those dollars into a coffee tin already half full of silver. The bank in Miles City had failed twice in his lifetime. The tin under the floorboard had not. These are the quiet habits a whole generation of cattlemen used to survive, the kind your grandfather knew and never wrote down. When Wyatt passed 40 years later, his grandson found what that habit had become. We'll get to that number, subscribe, and let's bring them back one by one. Some of these will stop you cold. One rancher fed his whole family for an entire year on just $6 in cash. Another ran 1,200 head of cattle on land he never paid a dime to own. A third kept a small fortune sitting in plain sight, right under the taxman's nose. Every one of these tricks was almost lost when the last of the old cattlemen rode off into the dark. So, let's count them down one by one from the top. Number 14, wealth counted on the hoof. In the spring of 1932, on a small spread along the Powder River in Wyoming, a rancher named Calvin Reese owned 11 head of cattle and not quite $8 in cash. The banker in town called him poor. Calvin laughed. A good steer in 1932 sold for around $26 at the railhead. 11 head was nearly $300 walking around on four legs, eating grass that cost him nothing. He didn't keep his savings in paper. He kept it in beef. When he needed cash, he sold one. When he didn't, the herd grew while he slept. A steer ate sunlight and turned it into money. Calvin used to say it plain. The dollar can burn. The steer can walk away from the fire. Number 13, cheap rangeland under the Homestead Act. In 1909, before he was old, a young drover named Thomas Eames filed a claim on 320 acres of dry Montana grass under the enlarged Homestead Act. The land cost him an $18 filing fee and 5 years of hard living in a sod-roof shack. By 1945, that same land carried 200 head of cattle and was worth more than $10 an acre. Over $3,000 in pasture, paid for once with $18 and sweat. The banker never loaned him a cent for it. The government had practically given it away, and Thomas had been awake enough to notice. Land was the real bank. It didn't pay interest. It paid forever. Number 12, the tally book and the brand. In 1938, on a ranch south of Amarillo, Texas, an old foreman named Bert McAllister carried a small leather notebook in his vest pocket every day of his working life. Every calf born, every steer sold, every head lost to wolves or rustlers, written in pencil with the date and the brand. His brand, a curved R over a bar, was burned into every hide on the place. A stolen steer in 1938 was worth about $31, a week's wages for a working cowboy. Bert lost less than 1 head a year, while neighbors lost dozens. He used to tell the new hands the same line every spring. What you don't count, you don't own. What you don't brand, you've already lost. If you remember the smell of a branding fire on a cold morning, or your father pulling a folded bill from the lining of his hat, this next part was written for you. Between 1921 and 1933, more than 10,000 banks failed across the United States. In cattle country, in towns like Miles City and Cheyenne and Amarillo, a man who put his year's earnings in the local bank in October could find the doors chained shut by March. The ranchers who survived weren't smarter than the banker. They were just older, and they remembered the last time. Memory was their interest rate. Number 11. Gold and silver coin buried in a can. In 1934, on a sheep and cattle place near Elko, Nevada, a widower named Henry Doss kept his life savings in a calumet baking powder tin buried 2 feet under the corner post of his bunkhouse. Inside were 112 silver dollars and 4 gold half-eagles. When Roosevelt called in the gold that spring, Henry didn't bring his in. He buried it deeper. By 1955, that small tin was worth more than $500 in metal alone, more than a year's wages for a hired hand. Henry never told a soul where it lay. He said it plain: the bank can close on a Monday. The dirt cannot close. Number 10. The grub stake. In 1939, in a saloon in Prescott, Arizona, a small rancher named Owen Vickers handed a broke prospector named Lee $22 in cash and a sack of beans and bacon. In return, Owen took a written share, 1/3 of anything Lee pulled out of the hills. Most grub stakes paid nothing. But the one Owen staked in the spring of 1940 came back with a small vein of silver that earned him just over $400 over the next 2 years, 18 times his money. He grub staked 4 more men in his life. 2 paid, 2 didn't. He came out ahead. He used to say it slow: you can't dig every hole yourself, but you can own a piece of every shovel. Number 9. Settling the whole year at the mercantile. Once in 1937, in the dusty town of Ogallala, Nebraska, a rancher named Earl Sutter walked into Hoffman's General Store one time a year in November after the cattle drive. He paid the entire year's running account: flour, coffee, kerosene, nails, calico for his wife, in one go in cash. That year, it came to $97.12. The Hoffmans gave him a 5% discount for paying in full and threw in a tin of hard candy for the children. Earl spent almost no cash the other 11 months of the year. The ranch fed itself, one settling day, then quiet. He said it the same way every November: pay once, owe no man, sleep easy. Number 8. Breeding your own remuda. In 1941, on a ranch in the Sandhills of Nebraska, a horseman named Jasper Quinn ran a string of 42 saddle horses, and he had not bought a single one in 20 years. He kept 3 good mares and 1 tough quarter stud, and every spring he raised 4 or 5 colts on grass that cost him nothing. A trained ranch horse in 1941 sold for around $75. A green-broke colt cost him almost nothing but time. Over those 20 years, he raised better than 90 head of horse, close to $7,000 in animals from 4 breeding stock. He used to tell his sons one line: a man who buys his horses works for somebody else. A man who breeds his horses works for himself. A 2019 study from the University of Wyoming Agricultural Archives looked at ranch ledgers from the 1930s and 40s across the northern plains. The finding was simple and quiet. The ranches that survived the Depression and the Dust Bowl had one habit in common. They produced more than 90% of what they consumed on the place: beef, milk, eggs, beans, potatoes, lard, firewood. Cash came in once or twice a year, and almost none went out. They weren't rich on paper, but they were nearly impossible to break. The men who lived through it didn't call it self-sufficiency, they just called it ranching. Number 7, living off beef, beans, and the land. In 1934, on a ranch near Roswell, New Mexico, a rancher's wife named Cora Whitfield kept a kitchen ledger of every cent of cash spent on food. For the entire year of 1934, she spent $6.80 on salt, coffee, sugar, and baking powder. Everything else came from the place: beef from a yearling steer, beans from the garden, milk from one cow, eggs from a dozen hens, lard from a hog. A pound of coffee in 1934 cost 26 cents. A loaf of store bread, 9 cents. Cora baked her own. She said it without pride and without shame. We don't go to town for supper. The supper is already here. Number 6, the prize bull and breeding stock. In 1929, just before the crash, a cattleman named Silas Tanner of Sheridan, Wyoming paid $240, a small fortune, for a registered Hereford bull he named Old Red. His neighbors thought he had lost his mind. Old Red sired better than 300 calves over the next 11 years. Each one grew into a steer worth $25 to $40 at market. That single bull, bought on the edge of ruin, brought in more than $9,000 of beef over his working life. The herd compounded like interest, only it ate grass instead of paper. Silas used to point at Old Red and grin. That right there is my banker. He works for room and board. Number 5, leasing the open range. In 1935, a rancher named Forrest Beaumont of eastern Oregon ran 1,200 head of cattle on land he did not own. Under a Taylor Grazing Act lease, he paid the federal government 5 cents per animal unit month, roughly $70 a year, to graze his herd across 40,000 acres of high desert. To buy that land outright would have cost more than $50,000 he did not have. He didn't need to own it. He needed to use it. Forrest put his cash into more cattle and better fence instead of into dirt the federal government would lease him for pennies. He said it plain: own what multiplies. Rent what just sits there. If you grew up in a house where your father said the same thing every time the bill came, we pay cash, we owe no man, then this next one was written by men who thought exactly the way he did. They didn't trust easy credit. They didn't trust the price the buyer offered on the first day. They watched the market the way a hawk watches a fence line. Patience was their broker. The calendar was their advisor. And the railhead was where the year's work either paid off or didn't. Number 4, timing the drive to the railhead. In 1946, a rancher named Curtis Halloran of Dodge City, Kansas, watched the cattle market every week through the summer in the Drover's Telegram. His neighbors shipped in late August and got 11 cents a pound. Curtis waited. He held his steers an extra 6 weeks on good fall grass and shipped on October 12th when beef hit 14.5 cents a pound. On 400 head averaging 1,000 pounds, those 3.5 cents meant nearly $14,000 more in his pocket for the price of patience and a little extra hay. He used to tell his hired hands one line as the cars rolled in: the grass is free, the hurry is what costs you. Number 3, the deed in the saddlebag and the Bible. In 1940, on a small ranch outside Santa Fe, New Mexico, a rancher named Augustin Mora kept the deed to his 320 acres folded inside the family Bible, between the pages of the Book of Ruth. The cash from the fall sale, $118, rode in a hidden pocket sewn inside his saddlebag for weeks at a time. No safe deposit box, no bank vault. He had seen one cousin lose a deed in a bank failure and another lose a year's earnings in a courthouse fire. Paper that mattered stayed where he could lay his hand on it in the dark. He told his son the night he handed him the Bible, "The book has held this land longer than any bank in this state has been open." Number 2, undercounting the herd. In 1943, a rancher named Walter Briggs of Miles City, Montana, ran somewhere between 400 and 460 head of cattle. When the banker asked, he said 320. When the county tax assessor came up the road, he said 300. When asked how he could be so sure, he tapped his tally book and said, "That's what's written, ain't it?" The difference, roughly 140 head, was worth close to $7,000 in 1943 beef, and it sat quietly off the books for years. Tax on each head was small, but it added up across a lifetime. Walter never lied to his wife or his maker, just to the men with pencils. He said it dry. The herd is mine. The count is my business. Number 1, own the land and the breeding stock. This is the principle every old cattleman lived by, and the reason every other trick on this list worked. They did not chase wages. They did not chase paper. They owned the 2 things on earth that multiply while a man sleeps: the land underfoot and the breeding animal in the pasture. $1 in a bank in 1933 could vanish by Tuesday. A mare in the corral threw a colt every spring. An acre of grass grew back every June. A bred cow gave a calf a year for 10 years running. They put their money into things that breathed and grew. Everything else, the tin under the floor, the deed in the Bible, the patience at the railhead, was just protecting what the land and the herd were already giving them. Own what multiplies. Everything else is wages. Now, back to Wyatt Holloway, the cattleman from Miles City, Montana, who slipped $42.60 under his bunkhouse floorboard in the autumn of 1936. He kept that habit every year of his life. Every fall, after the railhead, he peeled a few dollars off the top and added them to the coffee tin. When Wyatt passed in 1976, his grandson pulled up the plank. In that tin were 192 silver dollars, 11 gold coins, and a folded deed to 480 acres of Montana grass, together worth more than $14,000 in a county where the bank had failed 3 times. Now you know what was under the bunkhouse. Which of these habits did your father or grandfather live by? Tell us in the comments, and subscribe so the next one we bring back finds you ready.